Welcome back to Mike Reads the World, where I've entered a bit of a metafictional phase at the tail end of my 1001 Nights of Reading the World, which will be concluding at the end of September of this year, 2025. I began this project back in January of 2023 as an idea to read a book from every country in the world, and then I kind of moved away from that concept to I'm going to just read as many books from around the world that interest me as I can in 1001 Nights and make a video for every single one. And so I've done it. So far I've made these talk ramble videos for every book I've read for the last 2.5 years, but I've also come to the realization that I cannot keep doing this indefinitely, especially as I've come to further appreciate the joy of writing and learning how to write, and most of all, figuring out how to, what you want to say and how you want to say it, crafting that. That is really what I see as the future of this channel's growth and my growth. So all of this actually is really relevant to A Breath of Life by Clarice Lispector. This is the 5th book that I've read by her and the 3rd that I've covered on my channel. The Passion According to GH is the one that I would recommend as a place to start with Clarice Lispector. That's personally. But A Breath of Life is close to being my favorite, the one that I got the most out of, because another book of hers, The Hour of the Star, was her actual last published work. But A Breath of Life was the final thing she was working on, and it was unedited and unpublished at the time of her passing. So this has been kind of put together in fragments, and you can read a bit about that story in the introduction. But if I am to sum it up, besides just saying it is a bit of a mess, and it's hard to say to what extent Clarice Lispector, with all this myth making kind of around her and being this mystic, did her works just kind of flow out of her? A little bit of what I've read and what I think she crafted very meticulously her works, and she worked very long and hard on them. And so I think that if she had been able to edit this, we would have gotten probably a different book a little bit. But there is something beautiful about the mess that A Breath of Life is, and I don't think I really need to explain it more than that, but the way that I will describe A Breath of Life is it's a Pygmalion story. It's a book about writing and imagination and dreams. It gives all of us permission to dream, to write, to imagine explicitly and unapologetically, even if sometimes we do feel ashamed of our desire to write. So it's similar to Hour of the Star in the sense that it is about an author who creates a character and is relating to this character in like an indirect way, almost like a god to a person. What's even stranger about Breath of Life, though, is that this is set up almost as a script, as a conversation, bouncing back and forth between author and his character, Angela. Yet, you can't call it a conversation because they're talking past each other the entire book. They're not talking to each other. The author is often commenting on Angela, but sometimes just talking about himself as an author and comparing himself as a writer to how Angela writes. Angela, too, is a writer, but she seems largely unaware of this author god who is commenting on her, in between everything she is saying. So it's a very unique book in that way, and you can see why I say it's metafictional to some extent. Yet, it's impossible to say whether the author or Angela contains more of Clarice Lispector. They both explicitly contain, Angela especially contains autobiographical things about Clarice Lispector, like Angela has a dog, Ulysses, and there are certain elements of Clarice Lispector's life that definitely are Angela. But then, when, we don't know, but the author of this book then is who? So, the author, the character, is who? So, the reason that I say this is a Pygmalion story, okay, so if we go back to Ovid's Pygmalion from the Metamorphoses, it may be an older story than that, but Pygmalion is a sculptor who creates this sculpture. He lives alone, but he creates this sculpture that is so beautiful, so lifelike, that he falls in love with it. And I love the line, he disguises his art with his art. It's so lifelike that you can't tell it's art. It even insinuates that maybe he goes to bed with his statue and so on. And so he goes to a festival of Venus one day and asks the gods, too ashamed to ask for what he really wants, which is to marry his statue, his sculpture. He asks, please let me marry a woman like my statue, like my sculpture. And the god Venus, the goddess, knows what he truly wants and brings his statue, his sculpture, to life. And presumably they live happily ever after. So, A Breath of Life twists the Pygmalion story in several ways, but I definitely think it is, working off that anytime, really any sort of metafiction that is about an author kind of, their work comes to life and they interact directly with their own life, my mind immediately goes to Pygmalion. I think of Pygmalion as the original metafiction fable or something like that. I have to figure out a better way to say that. Again, back to what I was saying about wanting to write more than just these ramble videos. But it's especially interesting too because the Pygmalion story is framed within the Metamorphoses in a group of songs that Orpheus is singing. And so you have an artist, a musician, we'll say artist, singing about an artist who brings his own art to life. And this is right after a passage where Orpheus basically sings the trees into a forest, so it's like, there's this whole layered quality to this chapter 10 of the Metamorphoses that is like almost metafictional when you think about how Ovid, the poet, even thinks about himself and how he's creating the Metamorphoses and how he's using Orpheus to show stories about the artist creating. Anyway, getting a little off topic, back to Breath of Life. But when I also wrote here, and I don't know, I have to remember how I was relating this to Pygmalion. Oh, it's the life of the poetic image that we talked about in the Gaston Bachelard's Poetics of Space, where I had the wonderful realization in my life that poetic images indeed do have their own being, and they are entirely subjective. What I thought further about that and wrote as I was reading Breath of Life, when people talk about death of the author, or separating an author from their work, which I think is impossible to completely do, they really mean that the content of the work is often untraceable. So this is why we understand poetic images as their own being, both for their subjective effect, but also their subjective origin. It is nearly impossible unless the author, even when the author explicitly says, this was my inspiration, or this is where I got this idea, we can't entirely trust that, because the poetic image has its own being not only in the mind of the author, but the mind of every reader who interacts with it. Everything about poetic images is subjective, and that's why they have their own life. I want to be clear, because I'm going to be saying a lot of these sorts of things in this video, that I am not a solipsist, but neither do I believe in, there is this concrete, objective world, and that all of the crazy, things that are going on in our mind are just fictions, that our whole idea of a self is not real. It is clearly real. People clearly have real, invisible things going on in their minds. Okay, not even going to get into all of the implications of that. I just wanted to say that I'm not arguing that the whole reality of the world is in your mind. As we continue, I love the first line of this book. First lines are always very important. This is not a lament. It's the cry of a bird of prey, an iridescent and restless bird, the kiss upon a dead face. I write as if to save somebody's life, probably my own. Life is a kind of madness that death makes. Long live the dead, because we live in them. One of the important things about this book is, I think, and I mentioned this in my short summary, that it's very important, as I was just talking about Death of the Author, that, and I mentioned this in my Passion According to GH video, but I'm going to re-underline it again because I think it is so important, that I don't like all of this myth-making around Clarice Lispector and this idea that, like, you know, her works kind of just flowed out of her, or like it's just a lot of these sort of mystical sorts of things, because I just think there's a lot in this book that is just really down-to-earth relatable, and it sounds crazy, but it's also completely relatable. I don't know how else to say it. And I think it's important to not put authors on pedestals, and I think there's a line in this book that we are going to get to later that says it best. I might as well go to it now as I'm talking about it. Oh yeah, it's easy because it's page 100. The author says on page 100, not Angela, "Everyone who learned to read and write has a certain desire to write. It's legitimate. Every being has something to say, but you need more than desire in order to write. Angela says, as thousands of people do, and they're right, my life is a real novel. If I wrote it down, no one would believe me. And it's true. The life of every person is susceptible to a painful deepening, and the life of every person is unbelievable. What should these people do? What Angela does, write with no strings attached. Sometimes writing a single line is enough to save your own heart." Another thing I think is really interesting is that Angela, as a character, is often described in terms of, like, kind of mechanical, or almost like this insinuation that maybe she's something artificial, like a robot, like something that I'll actually read it. It comes very early on page 19. "Sometimes I feel that Angela is electronic." Straight up, right? "Is she a high-precision machine or a test tube baby? Is she made of screws and springs? Or is she the living half of me? Angela is more than I myself. Angela doesn't know she's a character. Besides, I too might be the character of myself. Could it be Angela feels that she's a character? Because as for me, I sometimes feel that I am someone's character." And again, the Pygmalion thing came to mind immediately here. "I'm sculpting Angela with stones from the hillsides until I shape her into a statue. Then I breathe into her and she becomes animated and surpasses me." You can also look at it as a Dr. Frankenstein story. That actually is probably closer to Dr. Frankenstein than it is to Pygmalion, the idea of scavenging pieces. But I don't see Angela as I feel a stronger connection with the Pygmalion thing and the sculptor, the idea of the sculptor, right? Pygmalion is a sculptor, not a scientist, or a researcher or whatever. And also in Passion According to GH, the main character being a sculptor, I think the whole story, of Pygmalion is somehow this presence behind a lot of Clarice Lispector's more metafictional kind of work, or her thoughts about the ideas of man and God and our relationship. That it's not necessarily this. It's almost it's a relationship of equal power, but unequal knowledge, somehow. Angela seems like something intimate that became exteriorized. Angela is not a character. She's the evolution of a feeling. She's an idea incarnated in the being. In the beginning there was only the idea. Then the word came into contact with the idea. And then the word was no longer mine. It transcended me. It was everyone's. It was Angela's. We see that in this sort of metafictional space too, we almost always end up on the verge of word games, of linguistics kind of trying to understand itself. However, I do want to say here, I don't want to fetishize metafiction as a genre, personally. Like, I don't want to be here and say, like, oh, it's the most encapsulating type of literature. It is, some of it is some of my favorite work. Classification is just a thing I'm not that interested in, but it's these attempts to blur the lines between reality and the poetic image that is most interesting. So seeing how they are both equally real and also seem totally distinct and unbridgeable, like life and death. That's why it's interesting, because you're attempting, in metafiction, what you're attempting to do is blur the lines between fiction and reality, when these two things seem so separate, yet they are both clearly real. And so to label it and elevate this as a genre is kind of beside the point to me. Like, you kind of have to put that out of your mind, I think. I write one book, and Angela writes another. I've removed the superfluous from both. This is a book of non-memoirs. It is happening right now. This idea of, like, this being in the eternal moment is something that I actually think is a thread through all of Clarice Lispector's work. It's this eternal now moment is also the moment, you know, that is the bridge between life and death too. And so that's, I think that all of her themes kind of revolve around that sort of presence in this energy of the moment kind of thing. Angela says, I really like things I don't understand. When I read a thing I don't understand, I feel a sweet and abysmal vertigo. She says, I'm an actress to myself. I pretend that I'm a particular person, but in reality, I'm nothing. She says, I don't fall into the foolishness of being sincere. And this is a recurring theme throughout the book, this idea of artificiality. The artificiality of Angela, of creation, and there are even parts later in the book about the, you know, that really highlight this almost artificial, mechanical nature of not only Angela herself, but nature itself. The nature of daydreaming, of imagination, is all a mechanical process of life trying to understand itself. The author says, just now I wanted to make Angela paint in one moment. Again, just going through my notes, the author says, trying to possess Angela is like trying desperately to grab hold of the reflection in the mirror of a rose. Yet all I had to do was turn away from the mirror, and I would have the rose itself. But then there enters a chilly fear of owning the strange and delicate reality of a flower. This is where the ideal of the story of Pygmalion, and I think this is a real big theme for me personally that I'm thinking about right now, that the story of Pygmalion, creating a lifelike sculpture, having his dream granted by the gods that it comes to life, embraces him, and they join in union, much like the story of the elderly couple who are turned into trees, die at the same moment, and grow together. Like, life never gives us this. These are impossible, beautiful dreams that when you read them, they make you cry, because you see the actual impossibility that you know they could ever be realized. A perfection. An ideal in art, you know, an ideal in art about the ideal. So it's that fear too, you know. It's like there enters a chilly fear of owning the strange and delicate reality of a flower. We don't really know the end of Pygmalion. if it were like real, how would that marriage go? Really thinking about it, does Pygmalion really want to have this living woman of his creation? That's the delicate reality of what he's created. So I don't know. It's another evidence that this is related to Pygmalion, I think. Angela says, "Bells chime, Orpheus sings. I don't understand myself, it's good. Do you understand me? No, you're crazy and don't understand me. Bells, bells, bells." I mean, just the Orpheus sings. There's many connections in this book, I think, to that story. So I liked this part. Angela says, "My ideal would be to paint a picture of a picture. I am so upset that I never perfected what I invented in painting." So the author at one point says that he wants to make Angela a sculptor. But now she's talking about painting, and eventually she's going to move to writing. She said, "I'm upset that I never perfected what I invented in painting, or at least I never heard of this way of painting. It consists of taking a wooden canvas, Scotch pine is best, and paying attention to its veins. Suddenly, then a wave of creativity comes out of the subconscious, and you go along with the veins, following them a bit, but maintaining your liberty. I once did a painting that turned out like this, a robust horse with a long and extensive blonde mane amidst the stalactites of a grotto. It's a generic way of painting, and moreover, you don't need to know how to paint. Anybody, as long as you're not too inhibited, can follow this technique of freedom, and all mortals have a subconscious. Ah, my God, I have hope postponed. The future is a past that has not yet come to pass. Do you ever find it strange do you ever suddenly find it strange to be yourself? I'm not a dreamer. I only daydream to attain reality. I only daydream to attain reality." Again. There's a moment here, then the author begins to wonder what to do with Angela. Kill her? There's another moment that highlights Angela's sort of feeling of being a mechanical, artificial creation when she says, "I ask questions out of nervousness, dismayed. And ankles? Are they important? Are they very important? I hear no reply to my question. May God protect my ankles and the back of my neck. They are essential places in me." And what this made me think of was actually the ankle. Was it Talus, the statue, the big statue of Greek mythology? Arguably an artificial. Was it his ankle, or yeah? I thought it was his ankle, so I'd have to double check that. But what it made me think of was Talus, and then the back of the neck, I was almost imagining, as she said that, like having a chip, like in those science fiction, those 60s and 70s science fiction films, they'd like put a chip in the back of your neck. I might even just be hallucinating that, honestly, but it just, for some reason, intuitively, that phrase made me imagine those two symbols of artificiality. Artificiality and reality, and nature and artificiality are very much blurred in this book in that sense. Even nature described as something artificial. So even like her dog, Ulysses, Ulysses drinks ice-cold beer so adorably. One of these days it's going to happen. My dog is going to open his mouth and speak. It'll be glory. Ulysses is Malta. He's Amapa. He's at the end of the world. So what? Ulysses is an island? Everything's an island. He barks square. He barks square. I'm not sure you're getting what I mean. During the World Cup, he went mad during the fireworks. and my head got all square. I try to understand my dog. He's the only innocent. Like barking square. Again, how that to me creates an image of artificiality. I'd love to expose. Yeah, then there's talks about music. Even music is described in terms of its mathematical nature, its artificiality at one point in this book. Here's another passage from 62. But this is a mad senselessness. Part of me is mechanical and automatic, neurovegetative. The balance between not wanting and wanting, of not being able and being able, all of it sliding along in a routine of mechanism. This neurovegetative, right? This mixing of nature and the mechanical. It's very interesting. Dreams, music. Sometimes I'm dense like Beethoven, other times I'm Debussy, strange and light melody, all accompanied by a breathing, 3 movements and pouring out from 4 wonders. My dream is accompanied by a breathing and by 3 instants from which 7 wonders pour. The mathematical nature of this. I walk atop and along the sound of a single prolonged note. The translucent green morning with the chirping of hundreds of little birds still has something of the dark night's nightmare. A dog barks in the harsh morning off in the distance. Yeah. We are living, the author writes, we are living at the fin de siècle, wasting away in decadence, or are we in the golden age? We're on the verge of an unfolding, on the verge of knowing ourselves, on the verge of the year 2000. The world, its merciless and tragic history is my past. Could it be that the word topaz has already been drained of its thought? No, I still feel the shining of an energy in the translucent golden word called topaz. I'm a beggar with a beard full of lice seated on the sidewalk crying. I'm no more than that. I'm neither happy nor sad. I'm exempt and unscathed and gratuitous. I'm almost sure that that's a Baudelaire reference. And as well as a very interesting glimpse, you know, sometimes you read these great authors of the past, and I mean, this was published in written in like the 1970-ish, copyright 1978, I guess. But, you know, you read them and you forget that they actually took place at a very particular period in time, especially in the 20th century, where things have just been changing at an extraordinary rate the entire time. And it's really interesting. But that actually brings us to the section of the book, how can you transform everything into a daydream? This is where the book really shifts into talking about writing, and Angela begins to imagine writing these stories. She's trying to think, you know, she says there's a book inside all of us, they say, and maybe that's why I wanted to expel from me a book that I'd write if I had the talent and also the perseverance. She thinks she doesn't write, she says, because she's lazy and fluttering. I want to live so much, and I think that writing isn't living. I underline that because this is, you know, really interesting, because Angela is going to eventually kind of start feeling this great sympathy with death that just emerges as it comes toward the book. Death starts to take over the book, and she's writing, and she begins writing. So there's this connection that Lispector, or the author, Angela, is making, are making to between writing and death, like this inextricable link. I think that writing isn't living, but I also almost want to push back on that, because if we've spoken about how we daydream our lives, basically that our reality is built off of our daydreams, then why is daydreaming living and writing not? Angela says on the same page, I'm so ashamed to write. I see this as her working through to getting to the point where she can. She also says, they objectify me when they call me a writer. I never was a writer and never shall be. I refuse to have the role of scribe in the world. I hate it when they tell me to write or expect me to write. That's actually the author that says that. Sorry, that's not Angela. So That makes more sense because Angela's actually just getting into writing here. She's overcoming some thoughts about it, and then we get to the book of Angela. So Angela actually decides to write a book about things, and this is a book within the book, like the picture within a picture. She thought that once she wanted to paint. The story of things. So Angela's book is about things and their auras, objects and their auras, and we get passages from it interjected by the author at every turn. And this is where the author said that passage about writing that I quoted earlier. And we come back to the artificial language here when the author says about Angela writing, "I'm efficient, Angela isn't. I give her some room to move around as though she were a mechanical toy, and she sets to work clatteringly. I then remove the clatter, oiling her screws and coils, but she doesn't operate under my mechanistic approach. She only acts through words when I let her be." And this is where one might say, well, this is clearly symbolic, metaphorical language, but I think if we actually, I like to take this metaphorical language, as these are artificial poetic images that I'm taking as literally as I possibly can. And it's interesting here too because Angela actually says in my book, The Besieged City, which is a book that Clarice Lispector wrote. So either Clarice Lispector was writing this note to herself, or Angela is actually being equated to her right here. And she also mentions one of her short stories as well. And there's this kind of, Angela here too is thinking, and the author are drawing connections between Angela being so fixated on inanimate objects that have auras, like auras and objects, as like women being obsessed with things, with objects. You know, I guess the rather than people is the insinuation there, or rather than how to tell if a mosquito is male or female, as the author says. So Angela fell in love with the sight of things. Things for her are an experience almost without the atmosphere of any thought or common expression. However, when she observes things, she acts with a tie that binds her to them. She's not immune. She humanizes things, so she's not honest in her intentions. And to be clear, I am not saying that I'm drawing that connection. It's kind of interesting because I remember in psychology courses they always told us that men tend to be more interested in things, but whatever. Imagination as sculpting, because it literally is the creation of an image. So Angela says, when I look, the thing comes to exist. I see the thing in the thing, transmutation. I sculpt with my eyes anything I see. The thing itself is immaterial. What is called thing is the solid, invisible condensation of a part of its aura. The aura of the thing is different from the aura of the person. Okay, that's good. But then she mentions animals and so on. Okay, more nature intermingling with the artificial and dreams and daydreams. Transmutation. Does Angela have the spontaneity of an initiative, or is she just my echo repeated in 7 caverns until she dies? Asked the author. Is this the author asking if he is Narcissus or Pygmalion? Because the echo repeated in 7 caverns definitely calls more strongly back to Narcissus. And so we ask, is art narcissistic or Pygmalionic? Is it a mix of both? Is it necessarily bad that it's one or the other, or that it's a mix of both? Or, as many things in this book seem to be implying, is it simply an automatic, mechanical process of us coming to know the world, know reality through our daydreams, through our imagination, to see things reflected back upon us, and understanding that we don't actually want a perfect image in that reflection. So the things that Angela writes about, woman thing, mother thing, the first 2 are identities objectified. But then we do actually move into things, folding screen, right? And now state of the thing. And then The indescribable. This is actually my favorite one because, again, brought up like this science fiction poetic imagery. I bought a thing with which I fell absolutely in love. The price doesn't matter. The object is worth the very air. The thing is a solid base of metal, very concise. In this shining cylinder there is the slightest opening. In it you put delicate and slender metal stems. And atop each stem there sits in glory a tiny and round ball that looks like a jewel of sterling silver. This object is magical. A breath or light touch of the hand is enough, and it vibrates all over interminglingly, sparklingly with the air. Is it an object of the moon or of the sun? It's like good news, like being happily startled, like a suddenly. It has 30 little balls and stems, but it's deceiving. When they start to vibrate and move, they're like delicate trillion little balls. There's one more thing it has. When the lights in the room come on and little balls cast a shadow, the little balls cast a shadow, greenish. What is she describing? Is this really just an well, it's called the indescribable. Is this an object that she's inventing here? Well, she just described it, so thank you, H.P. Lovecraft. The house, Bachelard. When she describes the house, I had to think of Bachelard. I'm not going to read the whole thing, though. I got to bring this to a close. I did really like the clock here, though. You feel in the clock time vibrating. Meanwhile, that is, while I look at the hours of the clock, life is evaporating and my heart becomes an object that sparkles. If I were God, I would see man at a distance as thing. We are of divine construction. The clock is a torturing object. It seems to shackle time. It seems shackled to time. It seems shackled to time. The second hand, if we kept watching it move mechanically and inexorably, would put us in a frenzy. I loved that. The butterfly is the one actual living thing she describes. And this is, I think, important. She says the mechanics of the butterfly. First it's the egg. Later the egg breaks and a caterpillar comes out. This caterpillar is hermetically sealed. It isolates itself atop a leaf. Inside it is a cocoon. So on and so on. And then takes off fluttering light and happy, a little crazy. Its life is brief but intense. Its mechanics are higher mathematics. And then I saw a black butterfly. It cursed me. Calling back to Machado de Assis' posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas, wasn't that a black butterfly? And then somebody in the comments told me, like, I need to look up, like, Schopenhauer or something and realize what that black butterfly was talking about. I don't know. That just triggered my memory, and now I have to go and look up what that was, because somebody told me it was mind-blowing. So, black butterfly, I know that means something, but I don't know right now what it means. So, yeah. The mechanical but irrational attachment of our minds to objects shows in practical terms how we dream the world. Angela says, I sometimes feel such pity for things. And then I thought of Bachelard as the author looking at Angela and saying, Angela lacks the creative ambition that is made of a hunger that is never satisfied. Discovering a new way to live. I believe that the key lies in seeing the thing in the thing, without going beyond or behind it, outside its context. The result of such a new way of looking at the passing moment is often to wonder at a thing as if we were seeing it for the first time. And this is where the author confesses that he is in love with Angela, but then says how much he hates her, and the ending, and then calls her his aphrodisiac as well, and that he's exhausted by her. So it really kind of closes this Pygmalion circle that I've been developing. And then there is some kind of messy talks about God toward the end of this, and it leads to these meditations on death. And one in particular, Angela says, my purest movement is that of death. And there's one passage in particular that I think is just the most heart-stopping in the book here. It's almost near the end. And I think the purpose of it, and this is perhaps me looking for some kind of more optimistic way to say what's in these final pages, that the breath of life is not found in Angela's creation by the author. So the breath of life in this book is not the breath that the author breathed into Angela. I mean, it is, but I think the other breath of life is actually the lonely daydreams of death that Angela experiences while writing that bring her to this moment of eternal now. That is where she feels the breath of life, or that at least is when reading Clarice Lispector, I feel it, and she may not have even written that, but this is what she writes in this passage where I thought of that and wrote it down. As for me, I discovered death. But how? To die without having understood? But that's terrifying. It's unworthy of the human being not to be able to understand anything of life. Yes, but mysteriously we go through the rituals of life. I give my life in homage to whom or what. I want to dedicate it like when you dedicate a book. God doesn't kill anyone, it's the person who dies. Even if someone, defend my goal, God, I'm imprisoned for 15 minutes. What delicious madness to write 13 as a number and not in words. I'll wait for you in the other world. First, though, I kiss my father and my mother. I shall be an infant rolling in space. Whose satellite? What a chill I suddenly felt when I said I was no one's satellite. I'm serious as hunger. I'm terrified. It's dawning. I'm dawning. I'm the chord of a harp. Goal. I'm serious as hunger. I'm terrified. My heart is in mourning, but it's dawning. Our seeds sprout. I'm dawning. I'm not a judge. No, sir. I'm a sweet viola. Better than Karl Orff is silence. Goal. What separates me from the world is my future death. Death will be my greatest individual achievement. A person undresses herself or herself to die alone of herself. Death is a biblical demeanor, and it has no discursive history. It is an instant. To die once and for all. The stopping of the heart takes no time. It's the tiniest fraction of a second. And later on, life covered by a veil of melancholy. Death, beacon that leads me the right way. I feel magnificent and solitary between life and death. And I think with all of the things we've been drawing, I too feel magnificent and solitary in that ever-present moment between life and death. I feel magnificent and solitary in that moment between the artificial and the natural, between the author and the character, between the daydream and the reality. Like unbridgeable gaps, they seem, but somehow together in the same moment. At the hour of my death, what do? Teach me how to die. I don't know. So, the book pretty much ends here. The ending doesn't leave anything clear. The book is a mess, a beautiful mess, and that's all I have to say about it. So, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.